Okay, welcome everyone to the second session of the Preventing Burnout by Completing Our Stress Cycle, part of the Staff Wellness and Health Booster Sessions for this season. Really glad to welcome those of you back that were here last Tuesday. And anybody who's new, just so you know, we've got Carmel Watson back with us from Manitoba Blue Cross, and I'm going to hand it over to Carmel to introduce yourself and the session. Thank you so much, Carmel, for being here. I'm Kate, and I'm the moderator, and I'm watching the chat. So any questions or comments you have, please feel free to put that in the chat. Over to you, Carmel. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Kate. Yes, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second part of our three-part series on preventing burnout by completing our stress cycle. If you were here last week or if you watched the rebroadcast, you would have heard a little bit of information about me. My name is Carmel Watson. I work at Manitoba Blue Cross in a position called Organizational Assistance Specialist. As I shared and was shared last time, my background is as a family therapist. So I have a master's degree in marriage and family therapy, and I've worked in a variety of different work settings. Nonprofit is where I started, working with people in crisis, families in crisis. I had a private practice for a period of time. I also worked within healthcare and more recently within the federal government. I came to this position here at Manitoba Blue Cross in September and very excited to be working with organizations to help promote positive mental health, support leaders, and sort of that ripple effect. If we can have healthy leaders that can support our employees and understand mental health can make a really big difference. So really excited to be in this position and really excited to present to a variety of different organizations, including Shared Health. So let's see here. I'm going to share the agenda just like I did last week, just to give you an overall idea of the full session. I have broken it up into three parts. So as you can see here, part one was about taking a closer look at what burnout is and what the signs and symptoms of burnout are, the different components, and then we did talk about a few tips and ways that we can respond. There was a video that was hopefully sent out, I believe it was sent out, that you were able to take a look at that really gave us a nice idea and to kind of maybe look at, hey, you know, are these things that I'm experiencing? So today is part two, and we're going to discuss stress mindset theory. So it's important for us to understand the difference between stress and stressors. It's also important to know that our perception of stress affects us more than the stress itself. Next week, next Tuesday, it will be part three. And so we're going to discuss all the ways that we can complete the stress cycle in order to prevent burnout. So these will be very practical tips and reminders of the ways that we can move through stress. So I've broken up each part into about 20 minutes. So again, today we're talking about 15, 20 minutes of information and then leaving some time at the end for any discussion or questions. So as Kate said, please feel free to write your questions in the chat. I'll just say, Kate, if there's something that comes up as I'm presenting, feel free to interrupt me. That's fine. We don't have to wait till the end. If somebody writes something in as I'm talking, that's perfectly fine too.
Okay, shall do. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, let's get into this. Actually, I shared this slide last time, and I just wanted to share it again because I think sometimes we wonder, you know, which groups of people are most commonly affected by burnout. And so it was a 2019 study, and I'm guessing it's probably the same information. However, there might be some slight changes over the last few years, but most commonly affected by burnout: teachers, nurses, doctors, social workers, elite athletes, and parents of chronically ill children. Now, according to, I'm not actually going to review too much about what burnout is. Again, you can watch the rebroadcast, or if you want some more information, I'm sure, again, that video is available that you can kind of take a look at that. I'm going to jump right into this next section. So this here, we are looking back a little bit at some stats from COVID. So according to the International Committee of the Red Cross, so they surveyed individuals across 7 countries. 51% of adults perceived that COVID-19 negatively affected their mental health. And in the Canadian context, so the Conference Board of Canada survey of Canadians found that 84% reported that their mental health concerns have worsened. So if we, to go back on burnout, I'll touch on that a little bit, but burnout occurs when our stress level outpaces our ability to handle and cope with the stress that we feel. So as you can imagine, we have added a lot of extra stress over the last 3 years. So in response to this, some of us told ourselves that we just needed to hunker down, right? So as we're dealing with all the stress in the last 3 years, some of us just responded by saying, okay, I need to hunker down, I need to work harder, I need to work faster, and just get things done. So that's how some of us responded. And we might actually call this a fight response. I'm going to get into the fight flight response in a bit. And then some of us may have ran away, right? We may have run away, decided to hide, to procrastinate, to pretend that it's not happening, and just not want to deal with it all, right? So some of you that might sound familiar to some of you. So that might fit with the idea of a flight response. Or we might have responded by freezing in fear and terror and not have been able to really do much of anything. In all of these situations, what we often neglect to do is to tend to the stress itself. Okay, so those are different responses, but often we don't necessarily tend to the stress itself. I'm going to get into that here. So something that many of us wrongly believe is that once we've dealt with the stressor, we've dealt with the stress. So this is a myth. Okay, stress and stressors are not the same thing. Okay, so, and we probably all know this experiential. So I'm going to give some examples to make that a little bit more clear, because it might sound a bit confusing right now. But here's some examples. This happens to me. So you're extremely nervous to deliver a presentation that maybe you've worked on and you've got to present it to, a big group of really important people, or maybe it's your first time presenting on this topic. So you're nervous, okay, and maybe you're shaking, maybe your voice quivers. But you get through it, okay? You get through it and you got it done. So once you're done, the stressor of the presentation is gone, but the stress itself hasn't been dealt with and it still lingers. So, maybe we need to, go to the bathroom, splash water on our face, call up a friend to debrief, or talk with a coworker before we feel like we've really processed through the stress. Another example, maybe you encounter an incident of some sort in public somewhere. So I don't know, maybe you witness somebody become escalated and angry, or maybe you were rear-ended. I think Winnipeg, a lot of us have unfortunately been in some of these accidents where we're rear-ended, or we rear-end somebody, or we witness a car accident. So luckily, in this example, nobody was seriously hurt. You made it home safely. But just because you were able to leave the situation, which would be the stressor, doesn't mean that you've worked through the stress, right? So you might feel exhausted, your heart might still be racing, or you're struggling to concentrate for the rest of the day. So that's, again, an example of the difference here, that once we've dealt with the stressor, we've dealt with the stress. Not necessarily, it still lingers. So let's take a look at this a little bit closer. Oh, let me see my screen here. Stressor, as you can see on this slide, are the things that activate our stress response. So they can be internal, external, or systemic. So an example of external stressor, that can be our busy work schedule. It can be having your hands full with kids, or taking care of a parent, dealing with finances. So those could be external stressors. An example of internal stressors can be having experienced trauma, especially as a young child, shame, perhaps a tendency for perfection. Sometimes we really focus on things needing to be perfect. That can be an internal stressor. And an example, or examples of systemic stressors, can be racism, homophobia, and gender inequality. So stress, let me click, forgot to hit my clicks here. Stress is what actually happens in our body, okay? So it's this gets a little bit fancy, but it's the chemical soup of cortisol, adrenaline, and other hormones that surge through our body, that activate our body and mind to do something about the threat, so about the stressor. So stress itself is inherently not bad. We hear that all the time. Stress in itself is not necessarily bad. And evolutionary speaking, it is a miraculous system in our body that helps us stay alive in the wild. Okay, so stress is the process in our body that tells us something isn't right. Stress is our nervous system activating and usually occurs in 3 different types of responses. And as I mentioned earlier, most of us have heard of the fight, flight, freeze response. So it's important, really important to note, and I'm going to get into this in a bit more detail, that we don't get to choose what our nervous system does. And there is really no right or wrong, good or bad response. It simply is, okay? So we just naturally have this response. Let me share a little bit more about this fight, flight, and freeze, which again, I know most of you have probably heard of, but sometimes we don't really break it down and understand why we respond this way. And perhaps we're not aware that we don't get to choose, okay? So I'm gonna try and quickly explain these 3 responses to help us better understand our reactions. I know it can get a little bit complex, so I'm gonna try and simplify it a little bit for our purposes today. So the term fight or flight represents the choices our ancient ancestors had when faced with dangers in their environment. So to fight or flee. In either case, the physiological and psychological response to stress prepares the body to react to the danger. So again, we're talking about way back, okay? So this chain of reactions results in an increased heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rate. Your body can stay in fight or flight for about 20 to 60 minutes after the threat is gone, which is how long it takes for the parasympathetic nervous system to return to a pre-arousal level. So yeah, that's a lot of information. But the fight or flight response plays a critical role in how we deal with stress and danger in our environment. So that's why I'm sharing this with you. So when we're under threat, the response prepares the body to either fight or flee. By what it does is it primes your body for action. So you're better prepared to perform under pressure. The stress created by the situation can actually be helpful, making it more likely that you will cope effectively with the threat. So, like I said, this type of stress can help you perform better in situations when you're under a lot of pressure to do well. So that example of doing a presentation, sometimes those reactions that we have can actually help push us forward to do well. So whether that's work, school, and so also in cases where the threat is life-threatening, the fight or flight response plays a critical role in your survival. So by gearing you up to fight or to flee, the fight or flight response makes it more likely that you will survive the danger. So we just jump in, right, and react. So, however, I do want to say, while the fight or flight response happens automatically, that doesn't mean that it's always accurate. Okay, so it happens automatically. Again, we don't necessarily get to choose. Sometimes we respond even when there is no real threat. So this is because the fight or flight response can be triggered by both real and imaginary threats. And phobias are a good example of how the fight or flight response might be falsely triggered in the face of a perceived threat. So, and I do want to say, some of you might be wondering, what about the last one on the slide, the freeze? Now, freezing is fight or flight on hold, okay? So where you further prepare to protect yourself. It's also called reactive immobility or attentive immobility. So it involves similar physiological changes, but instead you stay completely still and get ready for the next move. So if that makes sense for those 3. So there is one more reaction that is not on the screen that you may have heard about more recently, and this is called fawn. So fawning is a trauma response where a person develops people-pleasing behaviors to avoid conflict and to establish a sense of safety. In other words, the fawn trauma response is a type of coping mechanism that survivors of complex trauma might adopt. So we're not going to talk about that too much today. That's a newer one that you're going to hear about. But when we're looking at stress and we know that we're not running away from tigers, okay, that was again back in the day, so we know that we're not running away from tigers. I'm going to give you some examples of how this might play out for us in our everyday lives. Okay, so let's say you yell at your partner for pushing you into agreeing to speak at this conference when you don't feel ready. So that might be an example of fight. Okay, you get angry about something and maybe you yell. Or you avoid going to a party or you leave early because you don't feel comfortable around unfamiliar people. That might be an example of flight. I'm stressed, it's overwhelmed, I'm out, right? I'm just gonna leave, okay? Or your mind goes blank and you become indecisive when your boss or somebody asks you a question. That might be an example of freeze. Like, I don't know what to do, I'm just gonna be indecisive or draw a blank on what to do. Okay, so those are some examples of kind of everyday how we might respond to stress. Now we're going to look at the stress mindset theory. So I told you that this would be a big part of what we're talking about today, but of course I wanted to set the stage here so that we can understand this a little bit better. Now, several studies done by Stanford University show that our perception of stress affects us more than the stress itself. It's about our mindset or how we understand stress that affects us. So you can see if we have a stress enhancing mindset, our bodies are, oh, just make sure I got everything on the screen. Okay, our bodies are helping us to rise to the occasion to help us deal with the situation. It helps us deal with a new experience. Okay, if we have a stress as debilitating mindset, we might automatically have the attitude that the stress is going to be too much for us to handle. So right away, any sort of stress we view as negative, bad, it's going to be too much for me, I can't handle it. So you can see that that's very different, right? Now I'm just going to click, I'm going to show all of these at once. Okay, I think that's all of them there. So as you can see on the slide, there are different experiences one might have depending on that mindset, okay? Perceiving stress to be bad, threatening for us is more detrimental than the stress itself. So the next time you notice that your stress response is activated, a helpful thing that we can do is simply acknowledge that it's here to help you, alert you of any dangers, and to give you the energy to deal with the stressor. Last session, Chad had mentioned the name it to tame it, which, again, I'm going to bring up in our next part. But this is exactly it, right? Once we recognize that, okay, stress response is activated, if we can actually just name it and say, okay, I recognize what this is, I can name it, I'm able to tame it and even to recognize that, hey, it's here for a reason. I'm responding. My stress response is kicking in for a reason. And it's just letting us know, it's alerting us of any possible dangers and to give you the energy to deal with it. So there is that extra piece of recognizing, is this a real threat, or how might this threaten me? So perceiving stress as good for me or bad for me leads to different consequences. Perceiving stress as a potential benefit leads to increased motivation and feelings of taking on a meaningful challenge. So thinking, and then the opposite here, thinking about stress in terms of its negative impact produces anxiety and can result in other undesired outcomes. So a great way to shift this is to select situations, and this is, I feel like over my adult years, I've done a little bit of this. So you're going to select situations, including situations that does create some stress for you. So it might be a highly stressful situation that provide chances for growth, discovery, and learning. And you might start with small things, okay? Have you heard that saying when people say the things that scare you are probably the things that you're going to grow the most in, right? The things that scare you, you actually want to move towards. Because once you've done that and you've survived, you might be able to see that stress can in fact be enhancing rather than strictly debilitating. So this change in mindset can have a ripple effect in all the areas noted on the slide here. I'm sure some of you have examples of this, and please feel free to share any examples that you have of this. I know, presenting has definitely been one for me. That's kind of always been a scary thing, and yet I pushed myself, knowing that there's a lot of growth in that. When you push yourself out of your comfort zone, you're going to grow. For some people, if they have the mindset that, like, no, I would not survive that, it would go horribly, they may never push themselves out of that comfort zone and then learn how much growth there is or what they're capable of. So again, the difference there. I also did that a couple years ago when I decided to run a half marathon. Running has also been extremely difficult for me, and I had, I would use that label of like, oh, I'm not a runner, I'm not good at running. And at the same time, I always was like, oh, I'd really love to challenge myself. Like I'd love to say that I did that. So, by picking things, small things or big things, and kind of testing yourself, you'll be able to see that stress isn't always bad. It actually allows us to grow. So I'm going to share this next slide with you, where what we can do is think about stress as tunnels, okay? So think about stress and all of our emotions as tunnels where there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. So if you go all the way through them, you get to the end where you can see more clearly and are out of that potentially scary and dark place. So exhaustion and burnout happens when we get stuck in our stress and emotions and we don't complete the cycle of stress. So we're actually stuck in the middle of this tunnel, okay? Now, in order to get to the light at the end of the tunnel, we have to do the hard work of actually walking through the tunnel and completing the stress cycle. So, we have to do the work in order to get to the other side, to see the growth and to recognize that I can do this. Again, there is growth. Another point I want to make is that our bodies tend to only speak body language. I know that sounds funny, but it doesn't understand any other language. So yes, you can tell yourself that you finally, filed your taxes or that you finally accomplished a big project, but your body won't understand that and know that the stress is gone. So we need to speak body language to our bodies to signal to it that we're okay and we're safe, or else you'll stay in that state with those neurochemicals and hormones surging through your body, but never really shifting to relaxation. So that's what the next part is going to be about. It's going to be talking about what it looks like to get through this tunnel, how we can speak that body language to ourselves, and what we can do to complete the stress cycle and make it through that tunnel and then reach that relaxation. So yes, lots and lots of information, but if we think about it like that, the stress as being in a tunnel, we want to get to the other end. There is a beginning, a middle, and the end, and there's ways that we can help ourselves get through that tunnel. Lots of information today. I had said last time that I realized that this might be a little bit of a boring part because we get into some of those technical things. But lots of information for you, and there is more of these additional resources if you wanted to take a look at a book, a podcast, or some videos. I did share it last time as well, but it's included here today. I am curious, Kate, if there are any questions. I'm going to move into that next slide about what we talked about today or things that people wanted to share.
I'm not seeing any questions in the chat yet, Carmel.
Okay, well, we'll give people a few minutes if there's anything that they want to add. And then, like I said, next week is more about those practical tools, which is pretty much the title of the session, right? How to complete that stress cycle, how to get through that tunnel, what are the things that we can do to get through. Even some examples, like I said, if anybody wants to share examples of situations that they felt stressed about or scared about, but they moved towards it versus avoided it, and what that was like for them. If they, any stories about that moving forward is lovely to hear. It's funny, we try and teach our kids this, but yet we're not all that great at doing that. And we want our kids to try new things all the time. And some of our kids are much more willing than others. And it's the same as adults, right? Some of us are willing to try new things and to know and trust that there'll be growth on the other end. And some of us are just like, nope, I'm comfortable where I'm at. Well, and if we don't have any comments questions or comments coming in, that's perfectly fine. Things for you to think about and hopefully to join next week where we talk about those more practical ways to complete the stress cycle. I'm happy to give you 5 minutes back for your lunchtime or to do a little bit of self-care. But I'll let you know, or Kate, you let me know if there's anything further.
Thank you so much, Carmel. I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm guessing that people are good with the information. Your illustrations and images I thought were very appropriate to the topic and the content. For me, I'm visual as well as auditory, so I felt that really, really was, um, it flowed nicely. You're really nice to listen to. And my assumption is that everyone who's here has what they need from today's session. So thank you again.
You're welcome. Take care, everybody. I'll see you next week then.
All right, you take care, Carmel. All the best. Bye-bye.